You may be seated. When Andrew, now 31 years old, first moved to LA 3 years ago, he wanted to find a Jewish community. So he wandered into a synagogue, realized that he was 30 years younger than everyone else in the sanctuary, but still sat down in the back. No one came up to talk to him. He listened to the announcements at the end of the service to hear if there were any events coming up for people in their 20s and 30s, but he heard nothing. He waited around after the service into Kiddush, thinking maybe then someone would welcome him. Someone would notice that he seemed to be new. Maybe someone would tell him where all the young people were. But people stuck to their usual friends, and he left without finding the Jewish community he was looking for. So the following week, Andrew tried a different synagogue, but the result was the same. Again and again, he found himself in synagogues that did not seem to be for him. They seemed to be for people at a different life stage, and they didn't seem particularly interested in finding a place for him. Thank you. Can you help us understand our millennial children? And what you were really asking me is, Judaism's important to me. How do I pass it down to the next generation, Ledor Vador? This question about millennials is one I've thought about often. What makes us tick? What gets us involved? What do we want out of Judaism? And what should Judaism demand from us? To answer these questions, I interviewed a group of 9 LA Jews in their 20s and 30s, running the gamut in terms of their level of Jewish involvement. Now, I should mention these were 9 people who were all interested in having this conversation with me, so they have at least some affinity for Jewish community or connection to Temple Aliyah, even if it's minimal. So after 9 interviews, 2 years of building 3 different 20s and 30s groups here at Aliyah, and of course, a lifetime of being a millennial Jew myself, I am finally ready to share my thoughts. So here it is, what millennials want you to know about the future of Jewish community. So millennials, currently defined as people who are around age 25 to 40, are unique in a few key ways. First, we tend to be very comfortable with and have great access to technology and social media. This means we can easily reach lots of people at once, but sometimes, as I think we've all learned over the past year and a half in this pandemic, that access can come at the expense of creating real, intimate, in-person connections. We've also been trained to have a somewhat short attention span. There's a reason that TikToks and Instagram Reels are very short. And these short attention spans fit well into our go, go, go lifestyles, always feeling too busy, having trouble slowing down. On the one hand, that means that we feel like we never have enough time to be involved in a synagogue. And on the other hand, we desperately need a spiritual component of our lives to remind us to slow down and build personal relationships. On top of all of that, Jewish millennials are more integrated into the secular world than any generation before us, as each of the past few generations has been accepted by society more than the previous one, at least here in the US. So in talking with these 9 people, the message I heard over and over again is that what we want is community. We want to be part of a community of people who share something in common, whether it's a common belief system or common traditions and customs, a community that loves and supports one another. There's a famous line in Pirkei Avot, a compilation of ethical teachings from around 200 CE, Al tifrosh min hatzibor. Do not separate yourself from the community. This is part of the basis for communal prayer and why a Jew is not supposed to live in isolation. And millennials are taking this seriously. Each of these 9 young adults I spoke with emphasized again and again that community is the foundation of what Judaism means to them. And yet, the other statement I heard repeatedly is, people our age just don't go. 20s and 30s feel that no one our age attends synagogue services or programs. Of course, not everyone wants to go, as is the case at any age, but some people genuinely do. And part of what's holding them back is knowing that other 20s and 30s won't be there. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. If I go, no one else my age will be there. So no 20s and 30s show up at all. A 32-year-old woman told me that her ideal Jewish community is one that she would look forward to going to because it would be a chance to catch up with her friends, where she would feel that that is where community is happening. Maybe they would go to synagogue and then go to a nearby park for a picnic, she told me. She doesn't typically go to Shabbat services now, but she knows that if Shabbat services were a social community for her, she'd be happy to make it part of her life. But the reality is that there's a perception that a synagogue is not the place for us, that there's nothing here for us, that there's programming for every other stage of life, but not us. A few people I spoke with told me that they believe there's a bit of a misunderstanding about why we're not showing up. They said, it's not because we're millennials. It's not because we're some new, special type of generation that has no interest in Judaism. It's because we're at an in-between age, in-between life stages that synagogues tend to focus on. We're not children attending religious school or coming to synagogue with our parents. And we're also not yet parents ourselves, bringing our own kids to preschool, especially since our generation is having kids later. This life stage means that we have independence in a way that no other generation has right now. So we don't necessarily feel external pulls to be connected to Jewish community. Perhaps this has always been the case. Perhaps every generation has worried about the 20s and 30s and whether they will stay Jewishly involved. But the reality is that this in-between life stage is precisely when we rely on community the most. Now, this wouldn't really be a sermon about millennials if I didn't mention the TV show Friends. And of course, I watched the Friends reunion special several months back, and I was struck by the show's creators' statement that the show is about the time in your life when your friends are your family. It's a show about a group of friends in precisely this in-between stage of life, in between being children and being partnered off or being parents entering that next stage. Because that's the time in life when we rely most on having a tight-knit community. And yet, that seems to be the life stage that traditional synagogues are not catering to. Al tifrosh min hatzibor. Millennials do not want to separate ourselves from community. We know that community is how we will be loved and supported during this in-between time in our lives. But even though we want to be supported and loved in community, the next major point I heard from almost all of the 20s and 30s I interviewed is that we don't only want to be loved and supported. We also want to be challenged. We want to feel totally comfortable in a Jewish community. But once we're comfortable, once we know we have the community's full support and love, we want to be pushed. We want to be pushed with new interpretations and new ways of thinking, new perspectives on family life, on Jewish life, new ways to understand the world around us outside the Jewish community. We want to learn new melodies and new rituals. We want to meet new people from different backgrounds. First, we need to be comfortable, but then we want to expand beyond our comfort zones. One important way that we can provide comfort is to eliminate the shame around varying degrees of Jewish backgrounds and knowledge and observance. I have found that people constantly feel the need to qualify their beliefs and practices by admitting that they are not an expert in Judaism. So many young people say to me with shame, "I'm not that good at reading Hebrew," or "I don't remember all the Torah stories," or "Sometimes I'm not sure when I'm supposed to sit or stand or bow during services." Everyone feels that they don't know enough, and then we can't be comfortable to be pushed outside of our comfort zones because we're so worried about not embarrassing ourselves. We haven't been able to establish a baseline level of comfort within the community. I want millennials and everyone to know that whatever they know or don't know, whatever they practice or don't practice, whatever they remember or don't remember, that's okay. And they can still be an integral part of our community. And then I want to push them to learn something new, to push themselves to learn something new or try a new ritual only once they feel comfortable. Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the leading Jewish philosophers of the 20th century, applied the famous quote about comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable to Judaism by asserting that prophets are tasked with leading Jews in this way. I have this quote on a piece of artwork hanging in my office, actually, because even though we're not prophets, we have that very same job today in Jewish community. We have to comfort those who are afflicted, and we have to afflict those who are comfortable. We have to push to expand our comfort zones. I worry that when we think about programming for millennials, we only think about the comfort piece. And we forget that young people, too, want to be pushed to explore. In fact, when we're only comfortable, community can become boring. Afflicting the comfortable, as Heschel put it, is part of what keeps Jewish community exciting and compelling. I want to share one more overarching finding from my interviews. Millennials like to be counted upon. We know that our generation has a reputation for being flaky, as we say, not showing up when we say we will, or maybe not wanting to make commitments. But the reality is that we appreciate being counted upon. A number of people told me that they know that they personally can be a little flaky. They get invited to a birthday party and they never really RSVP, and then that night comes around and maybe they go, maybe they decide if they got a better offer. And millennials recognize that behavior is annoying. And they'd actually prefer to be held accountable. If instead of just an invitation to the birthday party, they're asked to come early and help set up, or to pick up the birthday cake, they show up. And we millennials like that. We like knowing that others are counting on us and that we can make a difference. We don't want to be assigned accountability, though, outside of an emergency. It needs to be a role or a task that we're genuinely aligned with. And when it is, we really do want to be counted upon. In the context of Jewish community, I can think of at least 3 ways that happens. The most obvious is through leadership roles, like serving on a committee, serving on the board, or even just being assigned a particular specific task. The second way to build accountability is through small groups. When we break large communities into smaller groups, like a chavurah, for example, not only do we help people develop those tight-knit relationships we're looking for, but we also make everyone feel accountable for showing up, because people will notice if we're not there. The third way, ultimately, is when millennials become parents who want their kids to learn about Judaism and experience Jewish community. This is another way that people feel responsible to get involved. And many millennials are not yet in that third category, but it doesn't mean we can't find accountability through leadership roles, small groups, or in other ways. We want a close community that includes us, that supports us and pushes us, and that invites us to be counted upon. Within that community, people have all different interests, just like in any other generation. Some people enjoy traditional prayer services. Some people connect through social experiences, like playing on the synagogue softball team. Some people want intellectual discussion groups. Some people want to focus on social activism. Several people I spoke with told me how important music is in an ideal Jewish community. Many of them mentioned how important it is to them that their community be egalitarian, welcoming to interfaith families, and welcoming to people of any race, gender, and sexuality. They told me that when people feel othered, they will be turned off, and so will their friends and family. Several people also mentioned wanting more education about Israel. They feel that they're constantly being asked questions about Israel, especially from their non-Jewish friends, and they feel they don't know enough. So our interests are broad, but what we have in common is a desire for a close community that includes 20s and 30s, that supports and pushes us, and that invites us to be counted upon. So why discuss this on Kol Nidre? Kol Nidre means all vows. It's our moment to walk back the vows we made to God over the course of the year that we couldn't keep. But Kol Nidre does not nullify vows between people. In fact, this time of year is when we get serious about honoring our past commitments and making new ones that will strengthen our relationships and our community. So while we nullify vows between ourselves and God, what are the vows we're going to make right now to our community? Will we vow to welcome newcomers? Will we vow to make millennials and anyone else who walks through our doors feel comfortable, welcomed, at home in our space? Will we vow to create the kind of community where someone like 31-year-old Andrew doesn't leave thinking, this really isn't for me? Will we push ourselves out of our comfort zones so that others feel like they can do the same, even when we're not sure we know enough? Will we invite people in their 20s and 30s to be counted on as leaders in our community, emphasizing how important they are to us? I know that the future of the Jewish community is important to all of you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here tonight, or you wouldn't be watching on live stream. So make one of these commitments to yourself for the new year 5782. I might be biased, but I think that millennials have a lot to contribute to the Jewish world when we're given the chance. And we want to be given that chance. We want to take responsibility. We want to support and comfort one another. We want to challenge one another. And most of all, we want to be part of a close and loving community that includes us and our peers. It is my prayer this High Holy Day season that the Andrews of the world, the 20-something and 30-something seekers, find their way here, and that when they do, we are ready and waiting to embrace them. Amen. We'll continue now. We'll invite you to rise as the Ark is open, page 458 or 233. We invite you to enjoy this video of Shema Kolenu and Hashivenu.